Here we're going to look at functions. You've come across functions before, perhaps without knowing things. Are functions, so for example, your straight line graphs are functions. So something that looks like this, don't write this down yet, is a function. This is a function of y in x because it describes y explicitly in x. There's nothing else there, there's no other letters explicitly in x. Something like this, we could say this is a function as well. This is y here is a function in x. So it's just a way of describing maybe a polynomial or a particular expression or equation in a slightly different format. So we're going to write a few things down. You can write a title, functions introduction if you want. We're going to write a few notes on this because that's just the way this goes. Remember, you can pause and stop the video if you need to. So a function really is a set of rules for turning one number into another. Okay, this is kind of a simple way of thinking it, kind of like a machine. You start with a number, you put your number in, it goes into the function, and the function then kind of spits a number out. Okay, so kind of a little bit like before, if y equals 2x plus 1, let's say just pick a random value for x. If x equals 3, the function y takes the 3, it times it by 2 and add 1, and it spits out 7. So that's kind of how a function works. Okay. Another way of picturing this, so keep writing this stuff down for your notes, is what we call a mapping from one set to another. Okay, I'm just going to draw this out. You won't see me do this again, but just to give you an idea of what I mean. So we have, say, one particular set. Let's just draw this oval shape, and let's say we've got a load of values in here. We're just going to draw them as dots for now. So we've got a load of values, and then we've got another set. Okay, and if I put this, say, this top value into the function, this top value in, then it churns out a value out here. Okay, it might be that this value gives a different value. Maybe this one goes to the same value. But every time I put one of these in the left, it goes to somewhere else, kind of in the right. Okay, so you put one value in, like in this case here, I put x equals 3 in. So this is like saying one of these values is 3, and one of the values I get out is 7. So say I put 3 in here, it gives me, say, 7 out. Okay, so 3 is what I put into the function, 7 is what I get out of the function. Okay, so we call it a mapping from one set to another set. Okay, and you'll see this kind of denoted like this sometimes, f of x, or f such that x is mapped onto something, or just simply as f. Okay, and they tend to use f, g, and h. So you can see like this. These all mean the same thing. Do get confused by them. And this is the same as just having something like, instead of having y equals 2x plus 1, I can just write it as fx equals 2x plus 1. Okay, so instead of saying when x equals 3, I can just put 3 in place of x here, and that means I replace the x's in this side with a 3 as well. So we get 6 plus 1, so we get 7. So it's just another way of writing the expression, but rather than using a different letter like y, we're going to use fx or f such that x is mapped onto something, which would look like this. They all mean the same thing. It means it's taking a value of x, in this case 3, it's applying some sort of rule to it, in this case 2 times x plus 1, and then it's spitting something out, in this case 7 when we do that. Okay, don't worry if you're not quite sure. When you start looking at examples, this will make a bit more sense hopefully too. So there's these two sets that we've got here, this set and this set, have a special name. So the set of numbers, keep writing all this stuff down, the set of numbers for which a function is defined is called the domain of the function. Okay, so this is just a kind of a fancy way of saying these are the numbers you are allowed to put into the function. Okay, and they tend to be x values. So in my example above, I put 3 into this function, so 3 would be part of the domain of this function. Okay, because I can put 3 in. And similarly, there's the set of numbers or the set of values, you might say, the function takes. For its given domain, or for the given domain, is called the range of the function. Okay, and these tend to be the fx values, or maybe the y values we talk about sometimes. Okay, and these are basically the numbers you get out of the function. So in my previous example, this fx, if I say my function is 2x plus 1, if I put 3 in for x, this would count as 3 being in the domain. And when that happens, I get 7 out. 7 would be in the range because it's something that comes out of the function. So the domain is the values I'm allowed to put in, and range is the values that I get out. Okay, that's all the domain and range mean, but they can ask you and refer to domain and range, so you need to understand what they are. Domain, stuff you put in; range, things that you get out. And finally, for some particular functions, some values must be excluded from the domain, and this is always a popular question for 1 mark. So this depending on the function. That you are dealing with. Sorry, there's a bit of writing, but that's the way it goes because we're at home. So some values must be excluded from the domain depending on the function that you are dealing with. You might have paused the video and have a think about what might not be allowed in and carry on, but I'll give you these things. So we're not allowed to divide by 0. Okay, so any kind of function where you end up potentially dividing by 0. So something like, if you had a function like this, okay, we wouldn't be allowed, so x not equal to 0. You'd have to say x is not allowed to be 0 because 1 divided by 0 is not defined. So that's one thing we can't do, and that might help you think about a second one. You cannot square root a negative number. Okay, and these pop up in questions where the function might have some sort of square root in. So any value of x which gives a negative square root, that's not allowed as well. Okay, but we'll come on to these in the questions later on. So that's kind of your introduction to functions and what they are. And then we're going to start looking at some examples of functions in the next video and how these work. It's probably a little bit easier to learn how these work rather than kind of the notes. Don't worry if the notes are confused you a little bit. Write them all down. Hopefully they'll make sense. When we look at some examples, that's the main thing, is that you pick up what's going on from that.